Hello and blessings to you. In this video, we're going to go over chapter 25 of our first Hebrew primer, which will be talking about variations in the hiphil stem. And so what this means is irregular verbs in the hiphil stem. So first we will talk about what these authors call transformer verbs, which are first yod verbs. And we'll also be talking about first nun verbs. Okay? And then we'll wrap up this chapter by talking about how to identify verbs and verbal roots in particular. Before we get started, let's go over some of this oral review. So we have Benai Yilveshu Begadim Ra'im Sheshet Yamim. And what this will mean is, my children, and we know this is children because this patak yod ending, that's the plural ending for pronominal suffixes for a first common singular. So this comes from ben, son, so children, my children. We have a 3MP imperfect from lavash, so to wear. So my children will wear bagadim ra'im, bad clothes. Sheshet is 6 yomim, days. So my children will wear bad clothes 6 days. Kind of an interesting line. Our next one is Bayom Hashavat Alvish Otam Bagadim Tovim. So this is on a day, the Sabbath, so on the day of the Sabbath, I will clothe them. So this is a first common singular imperfect. We know this from the aleph out front. And we know this is hiphil because of this hirik yod between the second and third root letters. So I will clothe, and then otam, this is our direct object marker with a pronominal suffix, a 3MP pronominal suffix. So them, I will clothe them in the clothes, good ones, so in good clothes. So on the day of the Sabbath, I will clothe them in good clothes. Okay, our next one, Shiva Malakim Malku Besheva Aretzot Esarim Shana. Okay, so this is 7 kings, they ruled I guess, well, let's see, in 7 lands. I was trying to decide which definition of our preposition to go with, so in 7 lands, or even countries. And then Esarim Shana, 20 years. So we have 7 kings ruled in 7 lands, 20 years. Okay, our verb is malku. This is just a pa'al 3MP perfect verb, so pretty standard, easy to translate. Notice we do have a difference here between a masculine 7 and a feminine 7. Shiva and then Shava. So this masculine is because it is it's paired here with kings, and then this feminine version is paired with lands, and kings is masculine, lands is feminine. Okay. Next sentence, Rak Hanavi Yukal Lahamlik Ish Acher. This is only the prophet will be able to crown a man another one. Okay, so our verb here, well, we have two verbs. So we have you call, so this is an imperfect from yakal, 3ms form, so it goes here with prophet, hanavi. So only the prophet will be able. And then we have, we know when we get our be able verb that we expect afterwards to have an infinitive. And in this situation we do. We see this from the lamed preposition. Specifically, this infinitive is a hiphil because of this I-yod and this hey out front. So then we're left with mem lamed kaf, which gives us malak, so to rule or reign, and then the hiphil that gives us to cause to rule or crown. So putting this together then, we have only the prophet will be able to crown another man. Okay, let's jump on down to our vocabulary now. So most of these vocabulary words we've at least seen in the previous chapter. Some will be new for us, and then some will be new verbs specifically, and then we also just have some other words we haven't encountered yet. But let's go ahead and go down this, if nothing else for review. We have yada in the pa'al, which means to know, and then in the hiphil, we have cause to know or announce. Yalad in the pa'al is give birth to or beget, and then in the hiphil, cause to have a child, cause to give birth, cause to beget, which could also just mean beget. Then we have yatsa in the pa'al, means go out, go forth, and in the hiphil, cause to go out, or then even bring out. We have yorad in the pa'al, means go down or descend, and in the hiphil, cause to go down, and when you cause something to go down, you are lowering it, so lower. And then I think we have some new verbs here. We have negad, which will, in the hiphil, and it only appears in the hiphil, will be tell or declare. It doesn't really have that causative sense because it only appears in the hiphil, so it's not a pa'al verb. We have nafal, which in the pa'al literally means to fall. Now this is an interesting word. The way that I remember this is in Genesis, I think 6. We have the sons of gods taking the daughters of men and intermarrying with them, and then this kind of obscure talk about the fallen ones, and people like to talk about the Nephilim. So I'm not sure if you've heard of those before, but that's just a transliteration of this word. The participle specifically of this word, so nafal, means to fall, and it kind of helps that the last two letters kind of sound like fall anyways, right? So nafal. Well, so then in the hiphil, nafal would mean to cause to fall, which could be like knocking down, so knock down. Then we also have netzal in the hiphil. So again, it doesn't have a pa'al version, a pa'al stem version of this word, and for that reason we don't have this kind of causative sense. Instead it's just on its own in the hiphil, so it means save, rescue, snatch away, something along those lines. Next we have chutz in chutzot, and that just means outside. It's a masculine word. Sefer, sefarim, sefer. So this is a scroll, a book, a document, something along those lines, something written down. You'll notice that this comes from safar, which means to count or add, which then can also mean to recount or tell a story. Narrate can kind of have that sense as well. And so from narrate or tell a story, then it also comes to mean things like scroll, book, document, other things like that. Our last word is re'ah or re'im, which means friend, and it's a masculine word, re'ah. A couple notes about the vocab. So you can find nafal in the pa'al pattern in our spelling chart. on these pages. I'll let you look that up if you'd like to. And then a note about chutz, outside. It can take the hey of direction, and it still just kind of has that sense of outside. I mean, if worse comes to worse, you can say even towards the outside. So ha'ish yatsa hachutza would be the man went out towards the outside, but then at that point you can just kind of drop the towards and just say the man went outside. So just kind of be able to recognize what's going on there with the head direction, and then we can cut it out anyways. Then also with outside, we can use the prepositions, the mem prefix and then lamed prefix on the following word, and that could mean either outside or outside of. So literally, we would have from outside to. So perhaps a comparison here with the mem. Remember our mem prefix does mean from, but it's also used in comparison. So outside in relation to something else. So here's an example of this. Hu yashav michutz la'ahalo. So he sat literally from outside to his tent. Okay, and then we kind of take this as an idiom then to mean just he sat outside of his tent or something like that. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about in this chapter are going to be what these authors call hiphil transformer verbs. And what other authors would just call them is first yod verbs, because their first root letter begins with a yod. So fairly straightforward. And we've encountered these in our other stems and how they do kind of interesting things, perhaps in the imperfect or other forms. And in the hiphil, they'll also do something different. Now, in the hiphil, in all tenses, the yod of the root is transformed into a holam vav. Okay, so that's why these authors use the language of transformer verbs, because this yod turns into a holam vav. So the verbs that you've learned that would kind of take on these changes are yalad, yada, yatsa, yarad. Okay, and let's see how this kind of plays out with yarad. So I am just going to kind of read down these paradigms so you can kind of get a sense for the rhythm. But as I do want to call your attention to the kind of signs, the signal letters and vowels that you are already familiar with from the last chapter, chapter 24, about the hiphil. So be on the lookout for these heys at the beginning, for heuric yods that kind of come into the middle here, especially in the imperfect, and then the mem of the participle and the heys of the command and infinitive construct form, and also the infinitive absolute as well. Okay, so kind of keep an eye out for that as we go through this. So here we have horadti, horadta, horadt, horid, horida, horadnu, horadtim, horadtin, horidu, horidu. Okay, then we have oreed, toreed, toridi, yoreed, toreed, no-reed, toreed, toredna, yoreedu, toredna. Moving on to the participles here in the ms form. So hopefully you already kind of have an idea of this. So here are masculines, feminines, plural, and singular. Should be fairly obvious. I just want to spell that out for you just in case. So here we have mo-read in our masculine singular form, mo-redeem in our masculine plural, mo-rida in our feminine singular, and mo-redot in our feminine plural. Okay, then with the commands, we have ho-raid, ho-redo. So again, we have the same kind of structure as up here, so keep that in mind. So ho-raid, ho-redo, ho-redee, ho-raidna. And of course, the commands are the imperfect 2ms forms. Not just ms, sorry. The second person forms. Without the signal letters, but then in the hiphil we will go ahead and add this holum, or not holum, sorry, this hey back to the beginning of it. Okay, so you can see this is to-read, and this becomes ho-raid. Now here the I-yod does lengthen into a tsere, but the other forms you'll be able to kind of notice that it comes from the imperfect. And then lastly we have lehorid and horaid for our infinitives. Okay, so fairly straightforward. This is the same hiphil pattern that you should be familiar with from the last chapter. All we're adding here is that for our transformer verbs, or our first yod verbs, so the first root letter is yod, the yod transforms into a holem vav, which obviously this vav does not have a consonant value to it. It is just a vowel. Okay. Any questions about that? And you can ask me in class. So here are some kind of tips on how we can recognize these transformer verbs. So hiphil transformer verbs all start with a yod, so that's kind of our first tip. And when you see a verb beginning with a holum, or with a hey holum vav, and ending with a regular perfect tense signal letter, the authors want you to think hiphil transformer verb. So yada becomes hodati, and yalad becomes holid. Okay. So keep that in mind. When you see a verb beginning with an imperfect tense signal letter and followed by a holum, also think hiphil transformer verb. So example from yatsa, we have yotzi, so he will bring out. From yada we have todiu, so you will announce, because it has that hiphil sense to it. You will make known, you will announce. Okay, and then a little bit on how to find the root of a transformer verb if you do not immediately recognize it. So first you'll remove the signal letters. So in the case of the perfect, that will be the holum, and in the case of the imperfect, it will be whatever imperfect signal letters go with that specific form, as well as all the suffixed kind of signal letters at the end. And then that will leave you with a holum and then two other root letters, a holum vav rather, and two other root letters. And then from that point, if you are to, well, okay, so I guess that's this step. And then from that point, if you are able to just switch out the holum vav with a yod, and hopefully then recognize what verb that is. So in this first example, we have horid. So they take out the hey, take out this yod because it's really just a vowel letter in this case. And that leaves you with a holum vav resh dalet. And then switching out the holum vav for a yod, you get yod resh dalet, or yarad. Same thing here. We have holadtim. So take off this hey at the beginning, take off the tim ending, this 2mp ending, and that leaves you with a Holenvav, Lamed, Dalet, as you see here, and then just switch out the Holenvav for a Yod, and you get Yalad, or Beget, and then in the hiphil, also Beget. Okay, then you have Hotseti. So once again, take off the hey at the beginning, take off the ending that goes with that form, and then that leaves you with a Holenvav Tzadeh Aleph. Switch the Holenvav for a Yod, and you get Yatsa, to go out, to go forth. So then in the hiphil, bring out. So I guess the steps that, so this is how you identify the root, which is great, and then you have to kind of plug that back in and say, what do we do with that? So maybe this would benefit from having an arrow coming back this way. And so then once we have the root, now we plug this back in. We see this is hiphil, so it's not just to go out, but maybe bring out. We see it is a first common singular ending, and so we say I will bring out, or I brought out rather, because it's in the perfect tense. Okay. And then of course the Holenvav indicates that the first root letter is a Yod in hiphil transformer verbs. Okay, so the next part of this chapter we'll talk about drop letter verbs, and in particular we're talking about first nun verbs. Okay, so if you remember, nun is a, let me draw that a little skinnier as a nun would be. Maybe that's a little too skinny, but you know that's a nun. So nuns, as you should remember, are very weak letters, and they like to drop out when they can. And in the hiphil stem pattern, that is one of the occasions they will drop out. So the way that you will know that this nun has dropped out is because a dagesh will be added in the second root letter. And not just a nun, there could be a few other letters that might drop out. A few of our weak letters like yods and heys sometimes drop out, but we know it wouldn't be a yod because in the hiphil our yods become transformer verbs. But anyways, so you'll know that it is a drop letter verb if there is a dagesh in the second root letter. Okay? So the key that the author wants us to use is if we know the roots well enough, we'll be able to recognize it even when there are only two root letters left. Now that might sound like a big ticket at the moment, but with practice, this is very true. You'll be able to just recognize things with what's left. Because the types of verbs that lose letters are the types that always like to lose letters. So those kind of patterns help you out. So it's just practice. At the end of this chapter, though, we will kind of go through how to find these root letters and what to do at that point if you can't recognize it still. So there's still some help that we can have. Okay, so this hey is characteristic of the hiphil pattern in the perfect command in infinitive, so not the imperfect and not the participle, but we kind of know those other ways that we can identify the hiphil. So once we've identified the hiphil and notice that there's only two root letters left, we can start to plug in some of these to see perhaps if it's nagad, nafal, or natsal. So let's kind of go to that. And on the next page, we're going to use our verb nagad that is new to this chapter. And it is very comparable to what we've learned in chapter 24, just like this up here was comparable to what we've learned in chapter 24. So let's go through this pattern. So we have hagadti. Notice that we do indeed have a dagesh here in the second root letter. Now at the time, perhaps you won't necessarily know it's the second root letter until you've kind of looked a little bit closer and see that there is only two and that this dagesh is here, indicating something has dropped out. So that's kind of what helps us here. So keep your eye out for that. Keep your eye out also for the regular hiphil patterns we have, like this hey hirik in the perfect, this hirik yod in the imperfect, our mims, our heys and other forms of it. So keep all that in mind as we read through this. So starting out with the perfect, we have higadti, higadta, higadt, higid, higida, higadnu, higadtem, higadten, higidu, higidu. Then in the imperfect, we have agid, tagid, tagidi, yagid, tagid, nagid, tagidu, tagadna, yagidu, tagadna. Now in the participle, we have magid, magadim, magedet, magidot. Okay, and then in the command, we have hagad, hagidu, hagidi, hagadna. And finally, in our infinitive form, we have lahagid, hagad. Okay. I don't think there's too much more to say about this. Here are some kind of like triggers that will help us to be attuned to what is happening with these drop letter verbs. So the first root letter of most, not all, but most hiphil drop letter verbs is a nun. So when you encounter in the hiphil, when you encounter a drop letter verb with just these two root letters here, and a dagesh in the first one, first thing you should do is go ahead and see if it is a nun, and see then if you recognize it. When you see a hiphil with the dagesh in the second letter, you know that it is a drop letter verb. So we've been talking about that a few times. Should be clicking with you. And the last of these three notes is that to find the root, obviously you'll remove those signal letters and then add the nun to the front. So here is an example. We have higadti. So take off the hey hirik and the first common singular ending in the perfect. That leaves us with a gimel dalet. And if we add a nun to the beginning, because this gimel does have a dagesh, that gives us nagad, so to tell. Next example, we have tafilu. So this one, take off the imperfect signal letter, take off the ending here. That gives us perhaps pei yod lamed, but this yod is really only here as a vowel letter, and it's between the second and third root, so that kind of helps us know that this is a hiphil. And that leaves us with a pei lamed. The pei does have a dagesh, so we know that that nun has kind of become this dagesh forte, and so that gives us nafal, and that is a verb we recognize. So let's talk about how to identify verbal roots, and then what you do if you only have two letters left. Okay, so there are lots of verbs in Hebrew, which though is actually a lot less than we have in English, and that's part of the reason why we have these different stems that have kind of different senses to them. So that allows us to have the same kind of root meaning of a word, but then different ways that that is brought out, whether it's intensified or causative or passive or other sorts of things going on. But that's not directly related to this, so let's go back to this. So in trying to identify a word, the first thing you should do is remove any prepositions, any conjunctions, or even the definite article. If anything like that appears before the word, first thing you should do is remove it. And this is just to identify the root. So then once we've identified the root, we'll plug it back in to get the meaning, right? So First, we'll take off that vav, so you can see, I guess I don't need to mark it up because I kind of go through this process. First, take off the vav, and that, in this case, leaves you with sheen, mem, resh, or shamar. That is a verb we recognize, and so we can be pretty confident that this is what's going on here. So plugging that back in, and we have veshamar, so perhaps this is a vav conversive, or a reversing vav. So maybe this is a perfect that actually then turns into the imperfect. So maybe it is he will guard, something like that. Okay, next example, we have le dever, take off the lamed, and that gives us dalet beit resh, or davar, which means to speak. So we recognize that, and then we plug it back in, and we see for it to have a lamed in front of it, this is an infinitive construct. So le devar. So to speak in that case. Okay, so those were kind of straightforward ones. There could also be signal letters at the beginning, the end, or the middle of a word. So these ones, they gave us kind of simple. So let's kind of amp up the complexity of this. So take off the signal letters. So that could be imperfect signal letters at the beginning, maybe perfect signal letters or imperfect signal letters at the end, or maybe different signal letters that let us know it's a participle, a hiphil in this last case. So take all of those away after we have taken away any prepositions or conjunctions or anything like that. So here we have eshmor. So if we identify this first letter as the imperfect first common singular, so I will form, take that off and we're left with shamar. So this just becomes I will guard. Okay, in the next example we have hashomer. Again, we can take off this definite article, take out our our active participle vowel here, and that leaves us with sheen, mem, resh, again, which is shamar. So perhaps this is the guard or something like that. Okay, next example. Here we have a lot going on. So here we have davarim. Okay, so take off the conjunction at the beginning, take off this mem, and take off this ending, right? So this mem and this ending might make us think participle, but we don't have to go there yet. We're just trying to find the root. So take all of those off, as we see here, and that leaves us with davar, to speak. Okay, next example. We also have a vav here. We have a hey hirik, which might tip us off that this is a hiphil. Not exactly what we're looking at the moment though, just trying to identify the root. So take that off, take that off. Then we have a lamed. Now we could think preposition, but we don't ever have a preposition after a hey like this. I mean, the hey perhaps could be a definite article, but still you would never have a definite article before the preposition like this. It would show up underneath it as a patak and a dagesh in the next letter, which is obviously not what is going on here. So we know then that this is going to be the first root letter instead. So we've taken off the vav, taken off this hey. We have lamed beit sheen. We know to skip this yod because it's not a consonant here, it's a vowel letter. So lamed beit sheen, take off this shuruk at the end. That leads us with lavash. Okay, I think this is definitely an important step, this third step here. I think it's interesting that we have this before we've actually talked about pronominal suffixes as object suffixes attached to a verb. So we've talked about this in class several times, that this can happen, but I don't think it's till chapter 27 that the book actually covers this, so kind of interesting to see it here in chapter 25. But let's kind of look at what this looks like. Well, so the first thing, I guess, is that our pronominal suffixes can appear at the end of a verb. And when that happens, it's like having our direct object marker with pronominal suffix without the direct object marker. So it's suffixed directly onto the verb. So normally we might have like something like, I don't know, let's say ota, like to her. Well, her, not to her, just her. So this is our direct object marker, et, and then with a pronominal suffix. Well, actually, I could just go with what they have, right? So maybe otika, so to you. So I could have our direct object marker with a pronominal suffix, or in some cases, you can have a pronominal suffix suffixed directly to the verb. So in this case, we have lishmarka. So take off our lamed in front, which might tip us off this is an infinitive, but I need to stop jumping ahead because we're not doing that yet. We're just trying to find the root letters. So take off the lamed at the beginning, take off our pronominal suffix at the end, and again, I keep marking that up. Of course, the author has it marked up for us here. So take that off at the end, and that leaves us with sheen mem resh, again, shamar. Same thing here. We have bet amarekum. So we have a bait here, our preposition. Take that off. That leaves us with aleph mem resh, and then we recognize this kaf mem as an ending. Take that off as well, and we have aleph mem resh, amar, to say. Okay, and then the last one here, we have uv am do. Okay, so take off our conjunction, take off this preposition. That leaves us with ayin mem dalet, and then this pronominal suffix, 3ms ending. So that leaves us with amad, so stand. So kind of interesting. So at that point, if you've identified a 3-letter root, hopefully you know the meaning of that root, and if not, you can always look it up in a dictionary. So obviously there's a dictionary at the end of this book, but hopefully at some point you'll also have access to your own dictionary, such as Brown Driver Briggs or some other sort of lexicon. And the authors want to mention that we will cover how to look words up in a dictionary in chapter 30. So, okay. So that's all well and good if you end up with 3 letters, but what do you do if you end up with 2 letters? So we know that our verbal roots each have 3 letters, but sometimes one of those letters might drop out for one reason or another. They could be a drop letter verb, they could be a hollow verb, or a verb ending in a hey or other weak letter that just drops out because for one reason or another it cannot stay in there, it's not strong enough. Or it could just be a verb that doesn't really fit any patterns and the letters just drop out. So if that happens, let's say we've gone through the process. Let's say we started with Ada. We've identified this aleph as the first common singular of the imperfect. Take that away. That leaves us with da. What do you do with just 2 letters, a dalet ayin? Well, the author suggests the first thing you should do is try adding a nun or a yod. Okay, so let's add a nun. We get nada. That's not a word we're familiar with. So let's try the other one. Yada. Okay, we know that. That means no. Yeah, we know no. And then, of course, plugging that back in, I will know. Right? Same thing here. If we go higad, higadti, sorry, took me a second to kind of piece that together. Higadti. If we take off our I-yod of the I-yod, not yod, I-yod of the hiphil, and take off this this first common singular ending, that leaves us with a gimel dalet, and here we actually have this dagesh forte in the gimel, which should maybe tip you off to add a nun to the beginning. This is probably one of our drop letter hiphil verbs, probably a first nun verb. But let's say we don't immediately recognize that. We add a yod first. Yagad, don't recognize that. Perhaps you look it up in a dictionary, don't find it there. Well, then just move on to maybe the nun at that point and say nagad. Okay, you know this one. This means speak, right? So maybe I spoke, or I told, rather, I think. Yeah. Okay, so, but say that doesn't work. You haven't had any luck with a yod or a nun. It could be a hollow verb. So then at that point we could try adding a yod or a vav in the middle. So here we have kamti. So maybe you could just recognize this as like I arose or something. If not though, then we can take off this tav hirik yod, this first common singular perfect ending, and that just gives us kam. At that point, maybe you'll recognize this from your vocabulary, but still, if not, that's okay. We can add a nun to the beginning, nakam. No, that doesn't look right. Add a yod to the beginning, yakam. That doesn't look right either. Add a yod or a vav into the second root letter, and hopefully then you'll recognize this as kum or kam. So another example of that with sam. Here, take off this vav at the beginning, take off our first common plural ending, and that just gives us sin mem. So yasam, that doesn't seem right. Nasam still doesn't look right. Seem. Okay, that's one that we recognize from our vocab. If not though, again, might have to look it up in a dictionary, and then maybe you'll find it there. But if that still doesn't work, it's not a drop letter verb or a hollow verb, it could end in hey, and that hey could be missing. So here are some examples of that. We have va'asu, so take off this vav, take off the third masculine plural, well, really common plural ending here. And that leaves us with ayin sin. So maybe we try yod ayin sin, no. Maybe nun ayin sin, no. Ayin yod sin, still not right. Ayin vav sin, that's not right either. Well, if none of those work, we can just add a hey to the end. Ayin sin hey. And this is our verb asa, to do or make. So, and they, maybe in this case, and they will make, because of our vav conversive here. Okay, another example of this. Here we have va'yare. Okay, so, and actually here with these third clipped forms with these vav conversives, that's might also kind of tip you off to not have to go through this whole process, but it's okay to go through this whole process. So here we have a vav we can take off. Maybe we can take this yod off, maybe not. It could go either way actually with this yod here. So we'll have to look a little closer to kind of see which one it might be. But so first, let's take it off. It's a pretty common imperfect right there. So let's see if this makes sense. So that leaves us with resh aleph. Maybe try adding things to the beginning. Nare, yare. Well, yare could actually still make sense, but we'll see in a second. Well, it might trick you rather. But so let's say neither of those work. Let's try adding in the middle to maybe ru or re. Still no, that doesn't sound right either. Adding a hey to the end though does give us ra'ah, see. So that in this case is what it is, see. But there are some irregular, well actually I first wanted to talk about, so this ra'ah could trip you up because yod resh aleph is our word for fear, right? So maybe, and he feared or something like that. Now our vowels here should kind of help tip us off, but that's not what's going on here. But it could still be confusing as you try to look this up. It's by context that we will know it's see and not fear, as it might look. So let's say none of that works. Well, there are some irregular verbs that just don't really play nicely at all and don't fit our regular patterns. And so the ones that are more frequently like that, you should be very, very familiar with and perhaps even memorize if you're able to. The word that the authors want to point out to you that is like this, that you've already learned, is natan. It's because both of these nuns are weak and like to drop out in different forms. Right. Another word that you haven't learned yet, I think it's in chapter 29 though, is nakah, and it means strike. Well, I'm not going to write it out actually. But that word has a nun and a hey in it, and so that will drop, both of those like to drop out as well. So in some verbs, perhaps all that's left is actually just one letter in the middle. Now that is very irregular and really no problem at all if you need to look up words like this. But there are some that do happen often and you can be prepared and be familiar with them. So natan is one of those examples. The author also points out there are certain other drop letter verbs, in the imperfect at least, in the pa'al pattern, that you should be familiar with because they happen so often, like lakak and halak, right? So the lamed drops out, the hey drops out, you're just left with these letters, and you need to be able to recognize that. Last thing, though, is what we've just talked about with our hiphil transformer verbs. So if you have a holem vav instead of a first root letter, you just kind of switch that out with the yod. So that's what we've talked about in this chapter. And so I'm not going to go through these examples, but you can see that you'll end up with these ones. So last note here, and actually I think we did kind of cover this extensively, so I won't spend too long on it, but there are verbs that look alike, and when you're missing letters, it might not be apparent what you have. So up here, actually, this vayara or vayare could look like yod resh aleph instead of resh aleph hey. And if you look that up in a dictionary, you would find that yara means fear. So when that happens, though, really your context will help you out. I mean, sometimes that wouldn't make any sense to say, perhaps like, he feared the cow in the field or something like that. He probably didn't fear the cow in the field, which, I mean, I guess that's possible, but your context will help you find out that it's probably he saw the cow in the field. And then you can kind of check your vowels underneath and see, no, that's not fear. It's and he saw or something like that. Okay, well that's all for this chapter. Blessings to you.